Welcome to the Plant Fit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Dr. Doug Lisle and Jen Howk. Dr. Lisle has been the clinical psychologist at the True North Health Center for over 30 years. He has published numerous articles in the scientific literature. He is the co-author of The Pleasure Trap and is in private practice conducting psychotherapy at the True North Health Center. Dr. Howk is an author, researcher, and interdisciplinary social scientist. She earned her BA with honors from the University of Washington and her MA and PhD from Harvard University. She is now based at True North Health Center as a lecturer and psychology coach. We start the conversation with Dr. Lisle and Dr. Howk sharing about what drives our behavior and why some fall short of health and fitness goals. Enjoy the presentation.
People, particularly with health goals, often really determine that it's their fault, that there's something wrong with them, because they've tried to get healthy so many times. They've tried to change their diet. They've tried to start a new exercise program. They've tried to do what they know that they need to do to improve their circumstances in life, and they've repeatedly failed. And so they kind of look at this and they've tried, they'll say, I've tried every diet, I've tried everything. The only conclusion that they're left to be able to come to is that there's something wrong with them, because it can't be all of these other things, because they've tried so many different things. So they always seem to fail in the same kind of way. And so it seems like there's something wrong with them. So people start to look, what could explain the problems I'm having? So they look at sort of their childhood relationship with food, or they look in the past to try to make sense of their struggles in the present. And they come to this determination that they've failed, that there's a personal failing. And what they're not looking at is the sort of context of the environment in which they're trying to solve the problem. And so they really need to make sure that they're setting themselves up for success in the best possible way. So, for example, with diet, it's much more about your environment. It's about what kind of food you have in your home, what is available to you at any given time, rather than what kind of motivation you have, or what kind of human you are. Those things are important, but the environment is really king when it comes to success with that problem. So the motivation that people feel to solve any problem is really, it emerges from two different things. One is, how important is it to solve the problem and to make a difference in your life? And when we say important, I know some of your viewers are familiar with Dr. Lisle, maybe not as much with me, but we both approach the world from what we call this evolutionary psychology point of view. So important to us has a very specific meaning, and that means that it's relevant to either your survival or your reproduction, or both. So if you have a goal in life that you really care about achieving, you only care about that goal because in your mind you were making an assumption that if you accomplish that goal, if you reach it, then you have somehow you will have massively improved either your odds of genetic survival or reproduction. That's just what it is. So when people want to lose weight, it's because they're thinking, if I could achieve this, I'm really going to improve my odds. I'm going to have more value on the mating market. I'm going to have better jobs. I'm going to have more success in life from this kind of survival reproduction lens that we put on things. So that's the first part of what really drives motivation for people, is how important to survival and reproduction you are perceiving that achieving that goal would be. I'm at this current situation in life. I have this big gap that I could close by achieving this goal. And my life will be measurably different if I achieve it. So if you're perceiving that to be the case, that's the first half of motivation. And the second half is, how likely do you think it is that you're going to be able to succeed? And if you've tried something a bunch of different times and you've failed, your perceived likelihood of success has been really diminished, and that's very demotivating. So you need to change the circumstances to give yourself a better shot at solving the problem. And there are a ton of ways to do that, and a bunch of different ways that we could talk about it. But I've been yammering and mansplaining long enough, so I'll let Doug jump in and talk about some of those things.
Yes, one of the things that people have a very difficult time appreciating is the notion of incremental progress. And so it's actually amazing when you look at the human experiment, particularly in the last 100 years, how far we've come. We were just inventing bicycles in the late 1800s, and the first automobiles were around that time, 120 years ago, and they were terrible. People died in them routinely. They didn't have brakes.
Who needs brakes?
They didn't have windshields, and so as recently as the 1950s, it was very common for people to have to pull off the side of the road, often with flat tires. And so this was. I actually remember being amazed in the last 10 years that I almost never see a car on the side of the road. It's almost never. When I was a child in the 1960s, you would see them all the time. It was routine if you were to take a 20-mile trip to drive down the highway, that there would be one or two people on the side of the road with a jack. And this is all the reason why that isn't true, and you've got 5 times as many cars as you did when I was a kid, is because of the incremental progress that has taken place in automobiles. So the automobile I drove here has 135,000 miles on it, and there's nothing wrong with it, and has never been in the shop for anything other than an oil change. That is incredible. In 1975 to 1980, 100,000 miles on a car, it was finished. The water pump's going to go out, the transmission, et cetera, et cetera. Incremental progress is the key here. So it turns out that with incremental progress, you can make spectacular advances. You don't see how to do it at the time because you can only see, the next 3 or 5%. But then the next 3 or 5% gets you to the next 3 or 5%. And then pretty soon, when we look back over our shoulders, we can find tremendous progress. A human being working on their own life can make unbelievable progress in 2 months. They don't have any concept about when they begin on day one. One of the things that when Jen and I talk about the environment, we have this strange lens that we look at the environment through. And that is that the environment is essentially an assessment of the opportunities and threats that are in the system. In other words, it's an entire analysis of the cost of things and the benefits that are involved. And so the food environment isn't just the food that's around in your environment, it's also how competent are you to put it together in a way that you like it, okay? So your knowledge of how to do that is actually part of your environment, because your assessment of what it's going to take to essentially get healthy, pleasant food in you changes if you think it's going to be 3 hours and, in 5 phone calls with your mother to try to figure out how you're going to make this recipe that's going to be 3 meals, big deal. Like, this is insane. So but once you get better at producing healthy food and you've shopped for it and you've actually gone through the processes, now the quote environment changes. Now it's like, oh, well, it's a 17-minute job between me and some really good food that's really healthy. And I'm not even going to be served at the restaurant in 17 minutes. So it's actually better for me to do it here. So this is, but you can't leap to that competence. That competence is going to come in incremental processes. And so people can get defeated because they don't get up the learning curve in the right place. This is the correct direction. We actually know, a lot of people know the food trip. In other words, whether we're talking about T. Colin Campbell or Dr. Michael Greger, or we're talking about Caldwell Esselstyn, or we're talking about John McDougall, these folks know what it is that we should be eating. The question is, how can we execute it smoothly and competitively so that when, it occurred to me something the other day. I was thinking about something. I wanted to share this with you. And that is that Jen and I talk a great deal about cost benefit. Essentially that your mind is an accountant in nature, and it simply is running the costs against the benefit. The word we don't use, which might be useful, is price. Instead of calling it cost, because we all recognize that we are very price sensitive.
Sure.
If the price goes up 10%, it's like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. If the price goes down 10%, oh, wait a second, I might be interested.
Doug and I both have a background in economics, and so we sort of think of the world in the language that economists use, and that's all about sort of cost benefit and demand curves and such things. But yeah, normal people in the world talk about the price of something, and it means the same thing. So that is a more effective way to talk about what it is. What's the price in terms of your time and your energy and your know-how in making yourself some healthy food? Like right now, if I were hungry, I know that I've got some frozen brown rice in the freezer that I could zap in the microwave in 2 minutes and have it be done. I can open up a can of beans and rinse it and mix that in. I've got some fresh salsa. I've got a little avocado. I have some arugula that I bought in the big tub, the pre-washed tub. It takes me literally about 90 seconds to put together a nice little starch-based meal. But I didn't know that when I started off. I didn't know that you could have these sort of shortcuts that make your life super, super easy, and that you can make the same kinds of things. It's the same sort of base ingredients that you just mix and match and you recreate. And as long as you're centering your meals around starch, you're on track. But there's a learning curve to that. So my price has lowered as I've become more conversant with what I need to do to prepare my environment. And also, as Doug was saying, the environment includes my skill set as I've gone up the learning curve with figuring out how to put things together, what I need, how long I can keep something before it goes bad, how often I have to go shopping to replace things. These are all things that people just kind of have to, you have to learn it as you go. You're not going to be fully equipped and right where we are when you first start out, because it's a very different way of eating. It's a very different orientation to how most people grow up and what kind of food they're making and what they think a meal should look like. And so it's a process, but this is all about, like we're saying, incremental change over time. You need to get out of the mindset that you're going to make this massive change and you're going to meet your goals really, really fast. You don't even want to be focused on achieving the end goal. You want to be focused on what you're doing today. This is very like 12-step, people who know me know that I'm 7 years sober from alcohol, and I did some time in AA and other 12-step groups. And there's a saying in 12-step that's one day at a time. You just focus on life one day at a time. You do what you need to do. You don't drink today. You don't do whatever other kind of addictive behavior you are supposed to be staying away from. And you want to kind of apply this here too. Like you're just going to execute these little baby steps that inevitably lead you on the path to where you want to go in life, and you're just focused on doing that today and feeling good about yourself today for doing those right things. And over time that adds up, and people need to have faith that that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. Often when people make that step and they like, okay, I'm going to change my life, at the same time they're worried about depriving themselves of things that they love and that they hold on to. So how do you make that the achievement, the sensation, that the positive sensation of the achievement outweighs the negative the sensation of a depriving habit, so to speak?
This is how I would like people to think of it. If people thought that in order to achieve their goals, they're never going to, for example, drink again,
right?
Or they're never going to have a chunk of chocolate cake, or they're never going to have any ribs.
Well, screw that.
So what's going to happen is that kind of mentality will, the price then seems extraordinarily high.
Way too high.
And the goals, the confidence that the goal could even be achieved is remote, and it's nebulous, and it seems not very likely. So the whole operation looks ridiculous from the standpoint of the cost-benefit analysis. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do instead is something different. What we want to do is we want to have the person think of this as an experiment. Mm-hmm. And we want them to think of it as, for example, a 30-day experiment. And in 30 days, the individual, that's a nice sort of length of time to be thinking about. And in 30 days, the notion is that we can parry all the internal baggage as well as the external. So other people saying, oh, that's ridiculous, you shouldn't eat that way. The answer to that is, oh, you're probably right. Oh, you won't do it. You're probably right. Oh, my cousin did that and got sick, so it's going to be bad for you. Oh, you're probably right. We just blow everybody off, okay?
It's only 30 days.
Yes.
I'm just trying it for 30 days. Come back at me and complain later.
Exactly. And for ourselves, the notion is, I'm not trying to trick myself into doing this forever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to legitimately run an experiment for 30 days. I'm going to do this just because, I've been doing things every other which way forever. And I've been chasing my tail and have been unsuccessful. So I've got goals that I really want to reach. This looks to be a very reasonable path to get there, but I'm not sure it's worth it. Mm-hmm. This would be the equivalent, for example, of a very good student thinking they wanted to go to med school. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, okay, well, I've got good grades in biology, so that's good. I still like that. And then I take chemistry, and then I take something else, and then I finally realize, you know what? I don't like this stuff this much. Mm-hmm. I really want to be an architect. And the heck with the whole thing.
Or an artist.
So the point is that, but we ran an experiment. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we got feedback, and we saw whether or not it made sense for us. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that most people will get spooked out of running that experiment for various reasons. They feel like they have to convince everybody else that this is the right path. They have to decide themselves that they're either on the path or not on the path.
Becomes a whole identity question. Am I a plant-based person? Am I a vegan? Am I never going to drink again? Am I a sober person? Like, don't put yourself in the position of like having to take on the mantle of a whole new identity overnight. Like wander your way into seeing if you like it first before you, it's like, it's like committing to a partner. You don't want to just, okay, well, I think you're pretty cool, let's go get married. It's like, no, you're going to get to know each other. You're going to live together for a while. You're going to figure it out. So that's the kind of relationship people should have. And with changing their diet in this way and leaving themselves open to discovering all the ways that it improves their lives on this incremental basis, and they start feeling better.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's essentially, there's a decision-making principle. And the principle is never make a big decision when a small decision will do. Mm-hmm. 30 days is a very nice small decision to give you a window to watch yourself go up the learning curve, to get more effective, and also to see what it feels like. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's actually a big decision to not do this. Mm-hmm. To never actually try to walk this road and never actually get control of your health and your future.
That is a decision.
That is a big decision to actually be making. Mm-hmm. So a smaller decision is, let's do this right for 30 days and see what the payoff feels like. Mm-hmm. And that's and it will be a hassle, mm-hmm. and the price will be highest in the first 30 days of any time. Mm-hmm. Just as getting sober, mm-hmm. the hardest is the first 30 days is the hardest.
Way harder.
The learning curve is the steepest there. Mm-hmm. And so for goodness sakes, give yourself a break. Mm-hmm. You're going to try to walk on this road. You're going to see where it seems like it's going. And then you're in such a much better position to evaluate the next 30 days after you've done the first 30. Mm-hmm.
I'll add to that too, a really, really important point, which is that, people get this kind of Ram Dass used to call it future tripping. I always loved that phrase, that people will get this future trip about, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to eat my favorite foods again. And I'm going to be living in this life of deprivation, and that's just going to suck. And so I don't even want to go down the road and try it. And it's that you will almost certainly relapse doing this. And this is where I distinguish it a little bit from alcohol, because, alcohol, for people who truly have a problem with alcohol, they can't afford to relapse. Not after a while, because it is, in my case, I can't just have one drink. That's going to send me so far back down the addiction rabbit hole that I'm going to be in big trouble. Food is not like that. Even really super normal, really exciting food, it's going to take you back into feeling like crap about yourself and accumulating piles of pizza boxes and living, feeling really like you've let yourself down and you've gotten yourself right back into the dregs of the pleasure trap, and it's going to suck. But with food, with this whole dietary change that people are making, because we're living in this, you'll often hear this reference that, oh, well, yeah, you can stop drinking, you never have to drink again, but I have to eat every day. Like, what am I supposed to do if I have to eat every day? Because we do live in a very supernormal food environment, very abundant, very, especially with, things like delivery easy now now that we're living the hashtag quarantine life. Like, it's so easy on your phone to just have anything, any drug of choice that you might want from the food kingdom delivered. There it is right there. So you should be prepared for the fact that you're unlikely to do this perfectly from day one forever. Some people do. They're the sort of freaks who walk among us who hear the good word and they're able to change their lives and they just never really tempt it again. But most of us mortals will slip and we will have suboptimal food now and then. But there's another saying in 12-step that I hold really close, which is that relapse is part of recovery. The idea is that every time you wind up getting into some less than ideal food, you're learning something. You're learning two important things. One is that you feel really crappy when you get into it. And it's the price is higher than you thought it was, to go back to what we were talking about earlier. So I'm in a very different position now than I was a couple of years ago, where I would have a craving and I would think, oh, okay, I want to go, I'm going to just do it. I'm going to have that thing. And you have this almost immediate realization that it's not as great as you thought it was going to be, and that you're like, build it up in your head. And then as soon as you have it, not only is it not as great as you thought it was going to be, but you feel really crummy afterwards, and you feel crummy for a while. And if you have a nervous system like mine, it puts you back into, it makes it harder to get back out of the pleasure trap, because then you're craving a bunch of other junky food. But this is an important process to learn. You're learning this not just sort of mentally, but you're learning it in your body. You're like integrating this as the lived experience. So now I recognize I don't have the kind of price distortion that I did when I first started trying to eat healthfully. Now I think about relapsing on junky food, and I know it's really, down that path is not what I think is there. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's just sort of a food hangover. And the other thing it teaches you that's really important is it teaches you that you can get back out. So if you slip, you claw your way back out. And I tell all my clients and myself when I slip, it's 4 days to freedom. It's 4 days of eating really healthy food on the outside. For some people it's 2 or 3, for probably, average would be 3 or 4. But by the 4th day, you're really like, it's like you wake up out of this fugue state. You're like, what was that? I don't even know why I couldn't get out of that. I got this now, no problem. That's all it is, but it's going to suck. You're going to be white knuckling it. It's going to be hard. But once you've done it once, you know you can do it. And that's an important lesson to learn. You can't just abstractly recognize that that's true without living it. So people don't need to be afraid of slipping and relapse, and I don't even like to call it relapse when it comes to food. It's just, you're going to get into some super normal food. You live in the modern environment. You have events with people. You're going to have your defenses down. The pleasure trap is the barbarians at the gate all the time offering you tempting food, and you're just mortal, and you probably will slip at some point. It's not the end of the world. It's actually a really important part of the learning process.
Yeah. You mentioned the cost price price benefit analysis. So for many people who are in a situation that they are not actively suffering from any health consequences yet, but if they were to continue down the road of a standard American diet or standard Western diet, they would eventually face health consequences. So how do you make a future price relevant for a decision today?
Yeah.
Well,
tough question.
The truth of the matter is that this has to do with personality. So really, you're talking about two characteristics in particular. You're talking about intelligence and conscientiousness. So intelligent, conscientious people are people that think through long-term consequences of their behavior or anybody else's behavior, or just life in general. And because they're looking long-term, they are more likely to essentially make better decisions. They're going to integrate a more effective behavior pattern. So these are people that save for their old age. Okay, so these are people that protect things that are important to them. These are people that don't let their insurance lapse on their house or their car or their health. So in other words, this is essentially responsibility and capability. And not everybody has this. So most people, behavior wasn't designed by nature you weren't designed by nature to beat the pleasure trap. Pleasure trap is an unnatural problem that has visited us now intensively for the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And the pleasure trap of 1930 wasn't the pleasure trap of today. People were eating food off the family farm. There was certainly some pleasure trap stuff, but generally a piece of chocolate cake was a birthday
rare
treat.
Restaurants were even more rare.
Yeah, restaurants didn't exist in the way that they do now.
Cakes were really hard to make even when I was a kid. You know, you didn't have the little prefab box mixes. They would fall in the oven all the time, you know, because people don't remember this. You certainly couldn't go just buy a pre-made cake at the grocery store. That wasn't a thing, even as recently as the early 80s. So yeah. We live in a very different world.
Actually, McDonald's was expensive when I was a child.
It was, yeah. So it was a big treat.
It was a big deal.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that people just did to eat and to skip out and just to make it convenient and easy. This was sort of an event in 1975, and so the world has changed.
Yeah.
And so as a result, the pleasure trap is a problem that you were not designed to solve. And so not everybody's going to solve it. So many of my friends in the plant-based world, they spin around saying, we've got to get the message out. We've got to get the message out. And the truth of the matter is that they would be well suited to be directing their attention to the people that can hear the message. And the people that can hear the message are people that are, bright and unusually conscientious, because most people, unless they've got pain and fear, as Alan says, he has a phrase, debilitating pain or imminent death.
He likes those people. He's like, yeah, it's coming to daddy.
Those are the two things that will get even a sort of an average person motivated.
Sometimes, yes, I mean, it gets them motivated, but it doesn't, if they don't have the conscientiousness. I mean, we've all heard stories, or we have a relative who had like a triple bypass, and the first thing they want to do is go get their favorite steak, or they want to go to McDonald's, or, somebody has emphysema with the trach in their throat and they're smoking the cigarette through it. I mean, that's low conscientiousness. That's what it looks like. It's people who don't have the assets to really fight against the incredible power of the pleasure trap, because the pleasure trap does not play fair. And so not everybody is equally equipped with the, enough weapons to actually make a stand against it. And the main weapon that you have is your motivation, key, very important, but also your level of conscientiousness. It's really important. If you've got very low conscientiousness, doesn't mean that you can't do it, but you better have very high motivation, and you better have a lot of support, and you better have enough intelligence that you can buffer yourself from your own worst habits, because it's going to be really, really, really hard for you compared to somebody with more conscientiousness.
It's very interesting. I've in my career, I have watched and talked to many, many people who were very smart, can't get out of the trap.
Oh, no. No.
Other people are maybe in the average range or moderately above average. Probably all of our people are above average, because they can read what is a college-ish level book.
Only above average people would find us and want to talk to us.
I mean, those are the only people almost
high quality humans
that are interested enough to read a book by Colin Campbell.
Yeah.
That's not Reader's Digest.
Right.
It's and even Reader's Digest isn't for the average person. So the truth is that thinking through these principles and listening intelligently to the facts and trying to synthesize what it all means for your health, that is an above average human, and just from sheer mental ability. And then on top of that, but that's not even near enough. Brilliant isn't enough.
Yeah.
You must have we have people that are bright, but not spectacular, but they are conscientious.
Super conscientious.
And those individuals are individuals that are able to essentially summon up the effort and determination needed to make some very important changes. So personality is, one thing that that has been an amazing thing for me to sort of watch and just watch it continue to be replayed over and over again is is an extraordinary species-wide lack of appreciation for the pleasure trap. The pleasure trap, Alan Goldhammer and I, my co-author of this book 20 years ago, we recognized that the system was being tricked. We could call it a trick, and maybe that would get people's... Trap is also a warning. A trick is like, it's actually both. It's both a trick and a trap. A trick means somebody's out to get you. A trap is that, well, there's something, it doesn't have to be a nefarious character. There are both.
It's a deception.
Yes, it's deception. And so your nervous system is being fooled. Your nervous system there is a deep deception here that it wasn't supposed to have. It was supposed to live in an environment where the best tasting food was the most valuable food for your survival. The best tasting food now is the most dangerous food for your survival. That is an incredible reversal. And as a result, it takes uncommon intelligence, well, maybe above common intelligence. It takes definitely above average conscientiousness, and it takes unusual motivation. I say it takes unusual people with unusual motivation is what's required. And the reason why the people struggle along the way, it isn't because there's something wrong with them. If you're struggling, it's probably because you're pretty normal.
Yeah.
Okay. The default of this is to get stuck in the trap. That is the default for humanity. And basically 95+% of humanity is stuck in the pleasure trap. And they will pay prices to various degrees. They may pay with 30 years of their life because they had an early heart attack, because they were smoking cigarettes, eating crap, and they're gone at 52. Okay, in the prime of life. It might be a 30-year price, it might be a 3-year price. But almost everybody is in the trap, paying significant prices to some degree. Those that won't pay the price are going to be unusually educated and unusually motivated, and unusual personalities. And we have to look at our personalities and look at our situations and find out where we have particular weaknesses and particular strengths, and try to match those to the problem and put our efforts to where they'll pay off for us.
That's fascinating. Is that something that an individual who's watching the summit can do as well, where they say, okay, here are my weaknesses, here are my strengths. How am I gonna move forward and adjust my life, my environment to make it work despite this pleasure trap which is all around us?
Yeah, you're looking at it like structural problems. You're changing the structure and the context that you're trying to operate in, rather than trying to change yourself. So, I have 2 dogs, and they have different sort of foibles and behavioral issues and difficulties and conscientiousness levels. And so one of the things I've had to do is that one of the dogs is a very picky eater, and he sort of wants to he likes to free eat. He'll have a bite here and there, and he doesn't want to eat at designated meal times. But the other dog, if there's food around, she's going to just hoover it down. She's just going to like, oh, I'm going to eat everything in my brother's bowl and then some. So I can't structurally, environmentally, just put the one dog's food down and be like, okay, buddy, just eat it whenever you want to, because she'll steal it. So that's like a structural problem to deal with personality issues, that the dogs are different. So I've had to engineer the environment to make sure that Motown can eat when he needs to, and that Melly can't steal his food like she would prefer. So you have to look at your own environment the same way. If you know that you have low conscientiousness, you've got to think about, how can you protect yourself from your own habits? How can you engineer your environment? How can you make sure that your environment's super clean, and bind your hands against, going out to your favorite grocery store. I have clients I've told to take a photo of themselves into their little neighborhood bodega and put it in the back with the bad checks, like, do not serve this person. People who have spouses who refuse to give up really super rich food, you've got to lock it up. You have to think of this really creatively and outside of the box, because this is not a normal problem. It's not something that we're supposed to be able to solve. Like Doug said, we haven't adapted to it. So to solve it, sometimes, it's a super normal problem, we need super normal solutions, and those might be a little weird, they might be a little unusual or uncomfortable or cause some conflict in your relationships. And that's the deal, folks. Like, that's what you have to do. If you want to fight against the pleasure trap, which does not fight fair, you might have to get a little unorthodox with your techniques, depending on who you are and how vulnerable you are. And being really honest about those things is where you start with this.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up, because we're right in the heart of all the kind of stuff that we talk about. And there's two comments. I don't want to lose them. One is that we don't change personality. And number two, the problems cause tremendous turbulence to self-esteem. So let's not lose both.
Really
so
important.
The first one I'm going to say, and then you can talk about the second one.
Okay.
But the people tend to believe that the reason why they struggle with these problems is because there's deficits in their personality. So I had a very bright, very conscientious woman who's struggling with this, making some headway. Call me, is there a way that I can just increase it a little bit?
I get that question all the time. And people watch us, they watch our videos on our website, they listen to us talk about how personality doesn't change. And we still get these questions like, can I just ratchet my conscientiousness up? Can I just be a little more extroverted so I have an easier time making friends? Can I just be a little more open to experience so I'm not scared of new experiences? Like, no, you can't. We really drive this home with everything that we talk about. But it's very hard for people to come to terms with that because it feels very limiting.
Yeah. And it's so counter to everything that they've heard.
Yeah.
So
you got so many people trying to sell you books to transform yourself. You know?
Can grow, transform yourself. You've been shaped by your environment. You've had trauma that needs to be transcended so that you can become the person that you always were meant to be. This is all BS. The truth of the matter is that your personality is, for all intents and purposes, it was fixed at conception.
Yeah. And
so this is such a revolutionary insight. It is probably 100 years from being widespread accepted by humans. This is so confusing that it's it's worse than the theory of relativity. Now, there's a theory of relativity. You can imagine some guy that works in a sawmill saying, "Oh, you go faster and then time goes slower."
Right.
Like, you gotta be
like whatever.
Yeah, whatever these guys are thinking.
Go work on your equations.
But at least those kinds of bizarre insights didn't threaten anybody's worldview particularly. Okay, so this world,
not like gravity did.
Right. So this worldview is so bizarre and is so outside the box for the way people are usually have been educated and think naturally, that it's very difficult to see, and yet it is so. And so the thing about this is that this is why Jen and I talk about that the thing to work on is your environment, not yourself. Okay, so it's working on your environment, being diligent about that, because you aren't going to change. Now, your life experience is going to change once you get your environment organized better, and therefore you have a better life. So Jen she tells a story about potted plants. So let's, but then we want to talk a little bit about that, and then we want to circle a little bit back to self-esteem and where it takes a hit.
Yeah. The potted plant idea is that, a lot of people have plants in their homes, and this goes back to sort of how I take care of the dogs. I recognize what's difficult for the dogs, what brings them happiness, what they need what do I need to change structurally for them to make sure that I'm giving them the best life that they can have based on their particular little individual personalities, which are very different from each other. And if I have a plant that, I have some plants that like a lot of sunlight, and I have other plants that like it more shady and a little cooler and a little wetter, and some like acidic soil and some don't. And it's not like I'm dumping a bunch of coffee grounds into a plant that wouldn't like that. I mean, like, no, you need to get develop better coping mechanisms to deal with more soil. Like, this is ludicrous. ludicrous. And I wouldn't subject my dogs to that kind of treatment either. But that's what we do to ourselves all the time. We have this kind of, especially conscientious people feel like they should be able to kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps and really just change who they are relative, like, oh, well, yeah, I've got a crappy boss at work who's making unreasonable demands of me, but I just need to learn to cope with that. I need to set better boundaries, and I need to like this sort of, I need to communicate better with my spouse that I hate, this kind of, these ways that people put these expectations on themselves, when really the answer is outside of you. The answer is your environment, and your environment is, it's a complicated idea because it's where you live, it's how you live, it's who you spend your time with, and it's also how you're learning to use the resources that you have, like we talked about earlier. So all of those things are expressions of how your environment is going to affect your lived experience. And then you wanted to get into self-esteem.
Yeah, so we'll talk. So we could. So the way Jen and I talk, this whole way we talk through is what we call esteem dynamics. Mm-hmm. And what we're very interested in is we're interested in the feeling that comes, that is generated inside of you, that we call self-esteem. Now, self-esteem is a phrase that's been around for quite a long time, and it has been it's been subject of a lot of pop psychology and a lot of thinking in psychology. They've been trying to understand it. They know there's something there, but they can't quite put their finger on it. It's very much akin to self-confidence, but it's not quite the same thing. It's more of a moral. A person can be very confident, but they can also not necessarily feel that good about themselves. There's slightly different shades of this. But the self-esteem mechanism, which is one of an internal audience sort of watching you and judging how well it thinks you are doing at something.
The voices in your head.
Yes, committee, as Rodney Dangerfield used to say.
Yeah.
What is assumed by most thinkers in psychology is that the self-esteem process is actually very sluggish, that it is very, that it is almost shaped in childhood, and that it is impacted tremendously by problematic relationships with parents, or from traumatic events of great loss, being embarrassed in the 3rd grade because we peed on the floor, and then we've never been the same since. In other words, the notion is that your self-esteem is a core principle and a core experience that changes very little. Now, there are some reasons why people would think that. One reason is our personalities don't change. So a general social competence and appeal to other people, etc., results in a very sort of similar life path for an individual from the time they're 12 to the time they're 92. Mm-hmm. So it looks like their self-esteem, whatever that is been shaped and then it's been fixed. That's actually a mistake. So that's a somewhat different issue. But the self-esteem mechanism of how motivated and proud and feeling good about yourself inside, that actually is going to be highly dynamic. Mm-hmm. It is meant to be as dynamic, essentially, as anything else in your life that carries, where we have to be very environmentally sensitive. So for example, we're very dynamic about the hot and the cold. So if you've ever been hot, you are not still hot now. It depends upon what your circumstances are now. If you've ever been hungry, you aren't necessarily hungry now. You could have been in a lot of pain because you broke your leg, but that was 24 years ago. You're not in any pain now about that leg. Your feelings are dynamic. And self-esteem is a feeling, and it is meant to be dynamic. It can't not be dynamic. Mm-hmm. However, if you live in a place that it's 92 degrees and humid inside your house, and you don't have any air conditioning, and it's that way all year round, you're always hot. If you're doing things in a way that are undermining your goals because you're in the pleasure trap, because you don't think in terms of experiments, because you've got limited personality resources, because you've got relationships that are not conducive to you being successful, then you can be in a situation where you're constantly undermining your own possible progress and your self-esteem mechanism feels chronically low.
Yeah.
But it isn't designed to always be low. It's designed to be dynamic. And Jen said a phrase that I had forgotten. I think you probably got it from me.
Probably. We trade stuff back and forth all the time.
4 days to freedom.
Did I get that? I don't think I got that from you.
Oh, you didn't.
I'm going to take credit for that.
Well, we'll see about that. Sounded really good, so it sounds like something I should take credit for.
Typical. Smash the patriarchy.
So the point is that, well, I think I talked about people 3 days. In other words, three days to self-esteem.
You're really like 90% of the
Right.
way there in 3 days.
If you start doing a very good job at something that you've been doing mediocre at,
or really crappy at.
right, it will not take but a few days.
It's
for your internal audience to see that you're praiseworthy.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not going to do it in half an hour. I do tell a story about this because personality impacts here. So there's a process by which you earn self-esteem. You also lose self-esteem, and it's going up and down just like your hunger drive is going up and down.
Mm-hmm.
I had one lady in the last year contacted me and said that she believed what I was saying, that it made sense, but she was going to work at it. She had a very naturally internal critical self.
Mm-hmm.
And so she diligently worked at this because she actually had some serious health problems. So she needed to. So she had some motivational push. And she contacted me and said it was 55 days before her self-esteem mechanism turned around and started to give her pride, which was incredible because I told her it would be like a week.
Yeah.
Okay?
Which it is for most people.
It is for most people.
Yeah.
So that was actually a remarkably intelligent, highly diligent individual that had an incredible natural self-critical eye. But it worked. Okay.
Yeah.
The other individual is the other end of the spectrum.
A little less self-critical.
So I have another favorite that called me up, and actually it wasn't a call, it was a text. And she said, Dr. Doug, I've just fallen off the wagon again, and I'm just a mess, and I've gained my 25 pounds back, and I'm so disgusted with myself, and I don't want any long explanation. Just give me something to, something to perk me up. And I said, go to the gym, work out hard for 90 minutes. Because if you do a good job on your diet for the next 4 hours, you can blow it at midnight.
Mm-hmm.
But if you put in 90 minutes of sincere effort, you can't give that back.
Mm-hmm.
And you will start to feel better about yourself. And she texted back and she said, that's fantastic. I feel good already.
Don't even
In
have
fact,
to do it.
I don't even have to do it.
And this is when we talk about bell curves. Bell curves are like these, it's this distribution of characteristics that fall in the population. So most people are in the middle of the bell curve. It's 3 or 4 days. But then you've got, it doesn't even have to do it to feel the pride kick in. And then we've got somebody who takes 54 days?
55 days.
55. So that's the longest we've ever heard of. And that's a very rare person. Most people, it's a week really at the side. And everybody's had this experience. If you think back in your life when you've had goals and that have really, or you've been like really slacking on something, you've had a job where you're sort of phoning it in and you want a promotion but you're not really working for it. As soon as you actually get off your butt and you start doing the fundamental tasks that are going to get you the better feedback from eventually the people outside of you, before anybody outside of you says anything, you start feeling yourself. You start feeling like you've got momentum and you're rolling a snowball downhill now. And it's like you've got this under control, and it has this sort of this power of its own, the motivation that starts to come from that feeling that you've got it. Everybody's had that at some point in their life, whether it's with weight loss or with anything else. And that's how quickly it can turn. And it can turn, it doesn't matter how deep in the crap you are. You can have fallen off the rails completely. And you can turn it around. It's always going to be hard to claw your way out the first couple of days, but you can start to stoke that feeling. What self-esteem really is pride. That's really what it is. It's a much more intuitive term for it for people to understand, but it's like Doug was saying, the term self-esteem has been completely co-opted by the Dr. Phils of the world who don't actually know what it means. But it's about pride. It's about the little voice in your head being impressed that you've actually done something for once. You're making some progress toward an important goal, and everybody has their hand on that lever and can really change their reality for themselves very quickly. So knowing that, and that's another, that goes back to that relapse as part of recovery. Every time you do that and prove to yourself and you feel the pride surge, you remember what that feels like, and you start to really understand that you have control of that. Nobody can take it away from you. Nobody else can do it for you. You have to do it for yourself, but nobody can stop you from doing it. So it's a really empowering thing to know that you have control over, but you don't know that you have control over it until you've actually done it. So you have to just kind of trust us long enough to put it to the test and to do it, and then to teach yourself that it's an incredibly effective strategy.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So it almost sounds like if I were to start an equation, on the one side, we have the personality, which can either work in your favor or against you. But for many people, it works against us. And we have the pleasure trap, which obviously is something that we are, from an evolutionary perspective, not designed to do. And to overcome them, on the other side, we have self-esteem, which is dynamic and we can use as a tool. And then we have the environment that we can set up and structure for ourselves. So those are two, what I understand from our discussion, those are the two sides that play against each other. So what can we do on the side that we want to be strong, right? So the self-esteem and the environment. So what are some of what you call the unorthodox strategies that we can do on a practical level day to day? What have you seen work, even if it sounds like a unorthodox idea at first?
I think tracking is huge.
Yes.
I think for a lot of personalities, and maybe for everybody, but specifically for certain personalities and for myself, I know I talk to so many clients. We get highly conscientious people who are watching this, who want to change, who want to, who are interested, who love spreadsheets, right? I hear so often, oh, I just love spreadsheets. And so make yourself a spreadsheet and start tracking, identify what these little components are that you want to be doing every day. But don't fall into the trap of setting the bar so high that you've got to complete 72 things or you're going to hate yourself, because a lot of the high conscientious people will do that. You're keeping this basic. We have something we call starch targets, which is just, there's no great mystery with starch targets. It's 6 things: 3 starch-based meals, a salad or some vegetables, some fruit, and some exercise. That's it. You do those 6 things every day or close to it, 80% over the course of a week, you will be getting healthier. You will eventually lose weight. You don't need to overthink this. But what happens is if you track those things and you track that you were diligent that day, it's like submitting a little report to your internal audience and saying, check me out. We agreed on the goals for the week, and I did my job, and this is what I did, and so give me my gold star. And this is really also important for the highly conscientious people who you don't want to leave that internal audience with open-ended expectations of you. People who have a sort of tyrant for an internal audience, and the internal audience emerges from the same neural tissue that built your personality. So people who are very self-critical of themselves, very conscientious, tend to have more difficult internal audiences. So the best way to manage that tyrant is to set some goals for the quarter. Set your goals, set the expectations, put them in a spreadsheet, track them, and it's like you're submitting that report every day, and the internal audience has no choice but to grudgingly start giving you some respect and some admiration and letting you feel that pride experience. So that's huge for people. And as you start to feel the pride, another 12-step saying, some of them are garbage, but some of them are very useful, is how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you're tracking and you're improving your life and you're really starting to get organized, you're going to just feel that sort of motivation in general to like really get your environment clean, really get it in such a way that it just becomes easier to be healthy than not. And as long as you can stay in that deep groove, that's going to be the key to your success. And then being aware that life will take you out of the deep groove from time to time. And it's not the end of the world. You can always get back in it, and your efficacy at getting back in it is going to increase as you experience it and you go through the ups and downs of life, and you learn that you have this power to change your life and to not yourself, but you can change your life because you've changed your environment, which has changed the way you can express yourself.
It's amazing. And it's inspiring to hear that despite of what we're facing, there is a way forward. So let's say someone is on their journey and they're struggling and they have these expectations to themselves and they keep track of what they do, but maybe, like they struggle to get the 80% for whatever reason. Maybe there's too much food being offered, or there's free food at the office, or whatever it is. So how do people not burn out if they're on the path of struggling, or when it just doesn't seem to click?
This is Jen describing the notion of pride and where it comes from. Super important here. Your self-esteem mechanism, the generating pride when indicated, this is a major component of human happiness. It's not all there is to human happiness, because so much of human happiness is what other people give us directly, feedback to us. In other words, we're out there to try to belong and be accepted. But one of the fundamentals of how it is that we feel is what our internal audience feels about us. And that is dynamic. And the important realization is to understand that we have 100% control over that. But the control is completely different than what modern psychology thinks. Modern psychology thinks that we have control over this through saying things to ourselves, by having daily affirmations.
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
Right, exactly. So the notion that they have to police their own thoughts, and that when they have a negative thought that crosses their mind about themselves, that they have to get that out of their head, that they have to watch out, for being programmed. This is all incorrect. These are extraordinary misconceptions about the nature of how the human mind works. So it turns out that the human mind doesn't work anything like that. The human mind actually works like a supervisor watching an employee. So if a supervisor is watching an employee, and it doesn't matter, what's really the conversation there is really that the supervisor is quietly and silently watching, and the only way to get that supervisor to say anything positive is to do a really good job. Now, if you do a really good job, they can't miss it, because their job as a supervisor is to be observing this. If you do a mediocre job, even if you had some candy cane supervisor that said, "Oh, well, you did great," it wouldn't have any feeling to it, and you know that supervisor is going to get fired. So that's an unsustainable process. No, the way the self-esteem mechanism works is that we have 100% control over our self-esteem, but the control is indirect. And it is, in fact, entirely indirect. But it's 100%. Okay? It's like a lever on a crane. We don't actually lift the stuff ourselves with our own muscles, but we must operate the crane properly, or it's not going to lift that boat and put it on the big boat. It won't do it. We have to operate it properly. The proper operations of the crane lift are your diligent efforts, as what Jen talked about, the fundamentals of the problem that we're trying to solve. And the starch targets is a very basic process for people in diet. We don't have to make life any more complicated than that. It's starch, fruit, salad, exercise. This is where you will cause your pride mechanism to go off. We don't have to look to the left. We don't have to go to the right. We don't have to go underneath. We don't have to go into your history. We don't have to change what your friend thinks about what you're doing. We don't have to do any of those things. The only thing we're going to try to do, and the only thing that will work to cause your pride mechanism to fire, those are neural circuits in your head that will not fire only under certain conditions. In the same way that your hunger drive only fires under certain conditions, that your sleep drive only fires under certain conditions, that the pain in your big toe circuits only fire under certain conditions. It takes certain conditions to make certain experiences. And the experience of self-esteem and pride only comes about under the conditions of, did you earn it? Okay, that's where it comes from. And you must take the actions diligently to create it. That will pull the lever that will result in the pride mechanism being lifted. Okay. Mm-hmm. Knowing that is one of the most important insights in life. And yet it's obscured. Okay. It's not obvious. It's so not obvious to psychology that it's not a widespread understood thing. Okay. And yet, once we back up the camera and we understand the mechanics of how it works, its insight is the answer to the question that you ask, which is, what if they're struggling and they're not doing so well, et cetera? Well, the big insight is, wait a minute, okay? I've got a tough job here. I've got a pleasure trap job in front of me. I'm scrambling around. I'm getting pulled by the magnets of the pleasure trap in. I don't feel so good about myself. How do I feel about myself? Not too good, not too bad. I feel like a B- student. That's what I feel like. Well, that's your self-esteem mechanism telling you. Okay? Knowing that the self-esteem mechanism will shift its internal feeling is super important, because when you pull that lever correctly and you have the feeling change, then you're still in an odyssey of trouble. If you're out to lose 50 pounds, this is not going to happen in 3 days, but the change of your feeling about yourself will happen in 3 days. Okay? Those are like the breadcrumbs that we are throwing in front of the pigeon to try to get it to where it is that we want it to go. Understanding that the self-esteem is an intermediate dynamic feedback system, that is probably the best thing that we can hand you conceptually, because that means that if you've got 270 days to get to the goal that you would want to get to ultimately, the truth is, it isn't about holding your breath and being a hero for 270 days. It's about discovering the beauty and the internal feeling that comes with having done an excellent job, and knowing the days that you don't do well and you don't feel so good about yourself, that the mechanism is working properly. That when you are disgusted with yourself, it's not because that there's something damaged about you. It's because you didn't earn your own self-respect. Okay? And understanding that it is a lawful process inside the way the nervous system is constructed is an extraordinarily important insight. And it's why we call what we do esteem dynamics, because it's the understanding that this is a dynamic process and that we have indirect 100% control of it is one of the most important insights that we have for all human achievement, including this.
That's absolutely fascinating. And you mentioned earlier that besides self-esteem, another feeling that humans strive for is belonging and acceptance. And unfortunately, when we go down the path of living a healthy life, often we don't have this belonging and acceptance. So how can someone who's listening and deciding, okay, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to build my self-esteem and stay on the road, how can they handle this, predicament?
Yeah, it goes back to this question of trade-offs. When I was talking earlier about sometimes you have to meet an unnatural problem with sort of super normal solutions. This may be challenging for your social group. It might be challenging for your core relationships for you to change your life this way. It might also be challenging for your close relationships for you to start feeling proud of yourself and feeling that self-respect that we're talking about. That can be very disruptive to certain relationships, because essentially it becomes a status battle. You're advertising that you know something that they don't, that you're competent at something that maybe they're not competent at, and that's innately threatening to a lot of people in a lot of relationships. And that is just what it is. My sobriety was threatening to a lot of people that I was close to at that time, and I had to let those relationships go if I wanted to stay sober. And that's an extreme example, because for me, alcohol is deadly. Food is not. So different people are in a different position where maybe the relationship is worth keeping, even if it's kind of shitty, because there's been some conflict that's emerged as a result of making changes in your life. But you've got to be honest with yourself about those things, and the ways in which this is making some relationships more difficult, or it's making it hard to make those connections. But the flip side of that is that, there is community that comes with living healthfully, in all kinds of different ways. There's now more than ever, you've got all kinds of internet communities, yours and ours and AJ's, and all kinds of places that people can find like-minded people, whether close to them or not, who share the same priorities and interests, and they can connect on and offline that way. And just as you get healthier and more interested in physical activities and participating in the world, you're going to find yourself more likely to connect with people who are pursuing health goals like you are. And that naturally, that's your environment changing organically. As you make some changes, it has these cascades throughout your life. So I wouldn't overthink that with as people get into this. It's one thing at a time, one day at a time. You don't want to be future tripping about like, oh, well, what does this mean for Christmas in 9 months? It's like this sort of just stick with it today, eat your starches today, check off your little boxes, feel really good about yourself. If you're feeling crappy about yourself, going back to what Doug said, I want people just to run a highlighter through that statement. Like, did I really earn my self-respect today? Did I do my best possible job? And if I didn't, how can I do that tomorrow? And how can I track it? And that's really the key. And just keep yourself very narrow, focused on those goals, and the rest will just emerge with time as you change your life this way.
Good. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it sounds like the most important to please is yourself.
Absolutely.
And your internal audience. So
yes.
that's a really nice message to end off. Thank you so much, Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Howk. This was totally amazing. And we would love to share your work with the world, even though it's not accepted by any mainstream psychologist or media. What you do is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Absolutely.
It was a joy to talk to you, Toby.
You bet.
Yeah.
Bye, Toby.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.